All right, so welcome everybody to our third last session, our fifth session out of the Meet the Critics series. Today we're with Karla Bernard. She's our new critic for social development and housing, and continuing on as status of women critic. My name is Jordan Bobber. I'm the executive director of the Green Party of PEI. And before we start today, I just want to acknowledge that the land that we're on right now and virtually gathering is the unceded traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I'm coming to you live from the boardwalk of Greenwich Park, as you can see. Not really, I'm actually in Georgetown. Um, I'm going to get started with just a few questions for Karla. We're going to ask her a little bit about, what her experiences have been in the roles that she's held for the last couple of years until last month. And then we're going to get into a conversation with you because the reason that we've invited you today was, Karla's new into her role as the social development and housing critic, even though she's obviously had lots of exposure to those issues through her work as an MLA. And so we really wanted to tap into the membership and people who are just, not even necessarily members, but members of the public to find out, what issues do you think that Karla should be working on? What should she be aware of? And perhaps what resources can you point her to? Some new ideas or people she should be picking the brain of. Um, so let's get started. So Karla, for the last 2 years, of course, we've known you through your role as the critic for education, as well as status of women. And touching first on education, I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about what you learned through that experience, maybe both about being a critic and about the education file.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. That's a big question. So it's so funny. I guess something that I did learn that's, I guess, kind of obvious in some ways, but how much we always say that nothing sits in a silo, yet
Mm.
we continually treat it that way. And we say we understand that they don't, but we really don't. And so I guess having, if I consider my previous life experience in terms of the role that I was in prior to being elected, which was in the education system, of course, and in the provincial addiction treatment facility for a brief period of time, um, I've really learned how much childhood health matters and how much it has lifelong impacts on your whole life, your work, your health, your how you move through the world, through the judicial system, all of those things, social assistance system. And so I guess what what's really easily transferable to me is what I did learn in education, and that I find myself while in this new role looking at new things, very much transferring so many things over to social development and housing. And
Mhm.
so one of the things that I've really realized throughout the last 2 years is how much I have naturally been an advocate for children and youth. And wouldn't have called myself that necessarily before.
Mhm.
And during the pandemic, having started the helped to start the Child and Youth Advisory Committee to inform and help with, the newly appointed child news advocate. And so what I'm noticing now is how crucial that lens on in New Brunswick, they use a tool called the Child Rights Impact Assessment, and how we could be applying that lens in social development and housing, because when we make things healthier for children, we know we make things healthier for everyone, healthier
Mhm.
and better and things. So I guess that's, I don't know if that directly answered the question, but that's kind of, there's so many things I've learned. It kind of was one of those things, you just spin the wheel and pick one when you're asked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that sounds like a really great transplant then. You're going to be able to take a lot of education with you into your new portfolio.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, a lot falls on the shoulders of education. And so
Mhm.
I think that we're going to see some transformative, I hope we are going to see some transformative things happening in education. Um, and of course, that's going to spill over into everything. It just kind of has to, I think, you know.
Yeah. Is there anything that you found particularly frustrating in the last couple of years in your critic roles? Something that you thought maybe would be something you could get to have to be changed for the better, but maybe ran into some roadblocks or anything of that nature?
So many examples of that. You think whenever before I was elected, because being elected was not anything that was ever on my radar until very recently in my life. I never even considered it before. And so I always thought, once I started to be interested in it, I thought, wow, what change I could affect from sitting in this seat. And then you're sitting in the seat and you're realizing that change is not only slow and painful, but it can be painful, but it's also scary for people. And so you realize as you're going through that people, I'm going to put it this way, but I don't know if I necessarily mean it this way, but people just kind of clinging to the status quo because it's what we've always done and it's what they know. And, they don't want to go off that track because heaven forbid, something were to happen. But heaven forbid something good were to happen, and so I guess
Mhm.
for me it's really been bumping into being a fairly progressive person and seeing all these possibilities and being a big picture thinker. It's really frustrating when you're sitting, in a space where you could affect some really amazing change, but people just are just not, I don't know if they're not getting it, they don't understand the impacts, they don't think, I'm not sure what it is, but it is very frustrating, I guess
Hmm.
I would say.
Yeah, I guess probably a similar frustration that anybody dealing with the health file has come across, eh? Very large, complex systems, right?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Okay. And what about in your role in status of women, which you keep? I know that you've done a lot of advocacy and you've brought forward bills and lots of things to do with that file. Can you tell us a little bit about what you worked on there and maybe what you're particularly proud of having accomplished or frustrations you might have encountered there as well?
Yeah, that file was really interesting, has been really interesting, and I was so excited that I was able to continue on, although I think anyone could have done an amazing job in that portfolio. Um, I think that that's really been, I mean, they all have been, but that portfolio is completely driven by um, organizations, community organizations that I meet with on a regular basis. And they're kind of telling me the struggles that they're hearing from on the ground from various different groups of women and those who identify as such, working with Women's Network and Peers Alliance and Coalition for Women in Government and Pride PEI and PEI Rape and Sexual Assault Center. So there's just, it's a wide range, women in trades. And I guess what I find really interesting is that we've come back to this place. And if we take women in trades, for example, and say, why can't we get more women in trades? And then I hear from women who say things like, well, they won't let me do what I'm trained to do. I have to sweep the floor, and my job is to clean the site. Or they'll make these really rude comments, but not. I really really believe that they're not doing so out of being unkind or mean. I think it's just the workplace culture. And so when we talk, a lot of status of women has to do with changing cultures and changing how we look at things and how we do things. And so
Hmm.
that one again is one that you really have to kind of look at the big picture and ask yourself, why does this matter, and so that one's been really really interesting too.
Yeah. So when you look at the status of women in PEI society through your role as a critic, did you discover that it was maybe not as far ahead as you thought it had, that we were, or were you not surprised? Did you? I guess I'm just wondering how it corresponded with what your perception was of the way things are on PEI for women.
I think I had a pretty, not a perfect handle, but I think I had a fairly good handle on how things were because it's something that I've just naturally been interested in.
Hmm.
But I guess where I am surprised is the more I learn about things like, why childcare is so important and why, how that affects things. And so if you look at things again, the whole silo thing is
Mm.
that, you need to look at the big picture of things. And so I guess I was still surprised at some of the barriers that women do still face, and just kind of in terms of like an example being the culture and trades, and kind of something really cool that I've learned from a few different women that I've spoken to, particularly women in trades. I keep going back to that because that's
Yeah.
been my most recent conversations. But they were telling me that they find the younger generation of tradespeople who are men or identify as such are very open and they are kind of a culture change. And
Mm.
so how much we have to learn from our young people, which I think is really refreshing, because I agree 100%. And that's why education is so important, right? And
Yeah.
again, going back to education, but placing kind of that again is more work that we have to do with our young people, so that they do keep coming up with these more understanding attitudes and inclusive attitudes.
Yeah, exactly. 20 years later, it starts to reap the benefits.
Yeah.
Um, so moving over to now your new role in as the critic for social development and housing, I'm wondering how did you end up in that role? And I know that Peter shuffled the shadow cabinet and chose you for that role, but why do you think you were chosen? And is this something that you were excited to get into?
Well, it's so funny because if Peter would have asked me to be the critic for social development and housing in the first place, I would have
Yeah.
been over the moon, because I'd been in education for 15 years, I guess.
Hmm.
And I was really feeling at the time, I was just kind of burnt out from work. I was so tired. I was so ready for a change. And then this all happened at just the perfect time. And so I kind of was looking for a break from education. And when I met Peter, I was advocating for mental health and addictions,
Yeah.
and education as well. But the main focus being that being kind of the focus of it, mental health and addictions and childhood
Hmm.
trauma. And so that's what I met Peter doing. And Peter was the only leader to respond to the letter that I had taken around to all the leaders. And so fast forward, we did a bit of work together, and he said, I'm the only Green elected in the House, and I don't know much about mental health. Can you help me, please? Like, if there's things I need you to look over or ask questions, like, can you help me? I need to learn. And he really, him and I started to work together. We started this mental health group together, and kind of spiraled from there. And so that's kind of where my heart was starting to lean. And to me,
Mm.
there's such a connection between mental health and addictions and childhood trauma, and then, and of course, social development and housing, right? And so at
Yeah.
the time, that's where my heart kind of fit. And then I was offered education, which was great. I was still excited to be able to make some of the changes that I knew needed to happen. I felt very well informed. It wasn't a far stretch for me to have to consult with people, because it's who I worked with every day. And so I had this bank of people all the time, which I'm going to miss in social development and housing, but I do still have some of those. So that's great. Um, but just kind of, so now whatever he offered that to me, it was so funny because when we were sitting down and I was talking about the different portfolio, the one that I was really interested in was naturally just I was leaning towards justice. And
Mm.
and so Peter had said, that's one that's usually put on the side of someone's desk. So it's really amazing that you want to focus on justice. And it turns out Lynn is also we were both kind of leaning towards it. And again, either one of us, I think, would have done some really different work. I think Lynn's going to do some really exciting stuff in justice. And so when Peter offered this to me, of course, I was kind of like, because it was going to be such a huge change, because now where I
Yeah.
was ready for a change before, I was starting to get back in my comfort zone again. And I think at first I was like, wow, just it's so big because there's so much coming, right? With the Residential
Yeah.
Tenancy Act and the Child Protection Review and the Adoption Act stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is so big. And
Yeah.
but it really is a natural progression of the work that I've been doing. And it's
Mhm.
funny because as I kind of look and see what am I going to focus on here, because this is going to be very valuable for me, this meeting, because I really am at a point where I'm looking at it as a blank piece of paper. And I've got some ideas down there and some pretty solid ways forward. I've been meeting with a few stakeholders and a few solid concrete things that I can do moving forward. And so it's really cool how it's all kind of coming together. So
Mhm.
it's a bit stressful and overwhelming. I won't lie. Any new thing is, that's life. But I really am looking forward to being in something totally different. And I have Brad Trivers back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Did you miss him?
Well, it's funny. I had a meeting with him shortly after being selected as the new critic, and the first thing I said to him, I was like, Brad, the first thing I said to Peter when I found out was, "You're not giving me Brad back, are you?"
Oh, it's good that you can joke about those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So actually, that's a good segue into my next question, which is whether you can help to give us a little bit of an idea of the full scope of social development and housing. Like, what kinds of things fall under that umbrella?
There's all kinds of things that fall under there. So, of course, social assistance, housing, any sort of programming, accessibility supports, that's where kind of most of the seniors programming falls under. Uh, Addiction, or some parts of addictions,
Mhm.
like mental health. There's some mental health programming in there. It's a huge umbrella. um, and I guess the way that I kind of look at it is, it's the way that we support people, um, without a health lens, but more of a financial. um, yes, yeah, sorry. I got a little
Right.
bit distracted there. um, I
So it's
lost
like the way we support people, not through a health lens, but more of a financial kind of.
more of a financial. I, I'd love to say more, but I feel like we have so much work to do in social development and housing. It's not even funny.
Mm,
Um, and so, but it's also an opportunity. This is where I'm reading a book right now on an excellent book. Actually, it's really helping me understand basic income guarantee on a much bigger level, and
mhm.
and really, there's so many exciting things. Just reading about what economists had planned for what the economy was going to look like by 2021. Well, maybe not that exact date, but into the future. And it's not at all what many economists had predicted, and
Yeah.
that they had thought people wouldn't be working as much and that people would be happier, and all of this stuff. And so I'm hearing so much. And I guess where I get stuck, I will give you the name of that book in 1 minute. It's on my nightstand table there. Where I keep getting stuck, and it's so frustrating. So, just very quickly, the way that government has decided to structure communications is that I'm not, as the MLA, I can only go to the minister. I can CC the deputy, but I can't go to anyone in the department. So, let's say, Jordan,
Hmm.
you contact me and your social assistance check this month was cut significantly, and you can't get a hold of anyone at the department because no one's returning your calls. That's like one of the hugest, not just about being cut, but something, not people not getting back to people, and then
Yeah.
not giving reasons, and so I 100% do not blame the people working in social development and housing. It's nothing to do with them. And everything to do with the fact that, just like I've learned in health, it seems as though most of our systems have been built upon reactions. And we just keep reacting to things. So we just keep throwing things together. And when was the last time we stood back and said, how is this serving
Yeah.
people? How is this serving the people that work for us? And
Hmm.
because their caseloads are insane. And I've had a couple of meetings where I went in as a support person for constituents, and they're really lovely and they're trying so hard. It's just, they work for this system. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot to do in there, and I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to stop there.
No worries. And it does seem that there would be a lot of connections between social development and health when you're talking about, like, especially mental health, addictions, the disabilities and chronic diseases and those types of things, as well as with the education system. We know that a lot of social work goes on in schools. To what extent, as far as you know, does the social development and housing department actually like collaborate with those other departments on those types of issues? Like, is it pretty siloed, or is there a lot of connection?
It is very siloed, because sometimes if I'm dealing with someone who falls under the two, that to
Yeah.
me, in my mind, you can't have one without the other.
Mm,
Their responses are very much siloed in terms of one will get back to me, but the other one won't, or they'll both get back to me and want to do different things that aren't connected, you know,
mm,
and anytime like I'll submit some written questions, and a lot of them are, how are you working with, surprisingly enough, it's not so much development and social development and housing, but I find this in all of them. How are you working with the minister of whatever to move this forward? And I never get responses to those questions. Well, I shouldn't say never. They have to respond now, but they're late. They're a long time coming, because there is no. I think again, it's just reaction mode. That's all we seem to be doing, and it's not. I mean, we're not doing a very good job of it right now. We never
yeah.
did, you know. And anyway, not to
Well, that's
sound
why
all
we
doom
need
and
a green
gloom.
government, people who look at these things in a little bit more of a interconnected way, eh?
Yeah.
So I'm going to open it up now for anybody who would like to bring forward any ideas or issues or resources. Oh, and there's the book that she was talking about, Basic Income for Canadians.
Yeah, but I can type it in the thing. But I guess I'll just type it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, if you have anything that you'd like to bring up, issues that you think that should be a priority in social development and housing, or even for under status of women, for Karla, just you can either raise your hand, and I see Grace has raised her hand. You you know how to do that. For those who may be new to this, you can find the raise hand function typically under the reactions button in your Zoom toolbar. Sometimes if you've got a icon, it might look like a little sort of emoji icon, and then there's a raise hand feature there. We're also a relatively small group, so feel free to just put an asterisk in the chat or something if you'd like to pipe in, and I'll get you on the list. But I do see that we already have Jeannie with her hand up. So I am going to ask Jeannie to speak.
Okay, thanks. Well, Karla, there are so many issues surrounding the areas that you're covering, but something that I became aware of in university back in the late 60s, I had a roommate who had arthritis, very severe arthritis since the age of 3. So I knew how difficult and painful it was to get around and the accessibility problem. And she fought for people with mobility disability to have the laws changed so buildings would be accessible. And I see today, this is over 50 years later, in Charlottetown at least, and probably everywhere in PEI, there's so many restaurants and other buildings that people in wheelchairs or just difficulty moving cannot get into. And I don't know how it's gone on so long. That should just be part of the building code, I would say.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, Jeannie, I just had this conversation yesterday with Marcia Carroll at the Council for People with Disabilities, and she was telling me how I learned a lot in that meeting, and she was telling me how there's kind of 3 standards for, there's 2 parts to this conversation, but the first thing was how there are 3 different kind of standards to say, you know, you can call a building accessible if you are, oh, I forget the name of I have it in my notes here somewhere, but it's like I forget the national building code is like the bare minimum. The Canadian Standards Association guidelines, that's what it is. It's kind of the bare minimum. So they can say a place is accessible, but you might just be able to get in the door, get in your apartment, but you can't wash your dishes because, or, you know, or there's like a stacked washer and dryer, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the, what kind of the middle of the road that people are advocating for, to say, at least let's get this as a bare minimum. It's the universal standards that does take into account all of those things. And then of course there's the Cadillac, and I can't remember the name of the one that that would be ideal, but they said, you know, even the middle of the road. What was really interesting, the second point, was that these heritage buildings, so when you're talking about downtown and the lack of accessibility downtown, you know, there's so many different things that contradict for people with disabilities. So the fact that we protect our heritage buildings and we're not allowed to change the design, so we may not be able to put a ramp because it's not going to look nice in the heritage building. We want to maintain that integrity, so we're kind of choosing like design over people. And the other one was just the environment. You know, if you want to go down to the beach as a person with mobility issues and you're in a wheelchair, well, they're going to have to put a ramp, you know, perhaps through a sand dune. Whereas you know, people that are mobile able are, you know, just need a little tiny path that they can walk through. And so, you know, oh no, you can't roam the dunes. So there's, you know, there's a lot of contradictions. And so Jeannie, I take your point. And it's funny because actually from that meeting yesterday, something that I'm mulling over in my head is perhaps a motion for government to, in any new builds, any funding, that anything that they fund, that they would have to use the universal standard design, which would give kind of that a much higher standard than just the national standard, the one that the Council for People with Disabilities have been advocating for, both on a provincial level as well as the federal organizations too. So that was one of my really clear, obvious things. And as for the heritage and the downtown buildings, I'm not sure how one tackles that, but I think it's a good start by saying any new builds at least will need that, and hopefully that will open up. You know, it's terrible that people can't go into certain buildings because they can't. It just doesn't make sense to me. I just think it's, you know,
Well, it
the
seems
least
like
we could do.
with heritage buildings, they're discriminating against these people, and they couldn't discriminate against them because of color or religion or any of these. So why can't they? I think they should somehow find a way to make it possible. And I see sometimes in these new builds, they say there's like going to be 1 or 2 units for people with disabilities. Well, I think it's time that buildings are built for everybody. And
Yeah. And that's what this universal design takes into account too, is that it's universally designed for anybody, and regardless of mobility issues. So the wide doorways and the not, like, you don't put, I mean, you don't put stackable washer and dryers if it's a universal design that anybody should be able to use. And so it's really interesting. And you know, and like one of the things I was actually quite surprised, because all the new builds where you hear, you know, there's going to be affordable, accessible units, like you said, like I forget the number exactly. You need so many for however many units, and I just took for granted that they would actually be accessible, you know, fully accessible. It never dawned on me that you could get in there, but you can't wash your dishes like that, you know. And I like exactly what you said, Norman. We're all temporarily abled. You know, I'm having an issue. I have a slip disc in my back, and it's taking a really long time to heal. And I said I have a whole new found empathy for people who live with chronic pain. I can't say I'm not in pain anymore, but I went through a period of time where I was in quite severe pain, and even now my walking, I've slowed down a lot. So I'm a fast walker. And so anytime we're walking somewhere, people are used to me walking fast, and I can't keep up. And I know that's obviously I'm a healthy person. I'm not suggesting that, you know, I understand what it's like to live with a disability, but those little things make you realize, you know, hey, not everybody can just get up and walk faster. Not everybody can just get up and wash their dishes. And that's a key piece to living happily and healthily, is to be able to take care of your basic needs if you're able, you know?
Right.
Yeah, that was a really good point that you brought up, Jeannie. And yeah, it seems like there should be some more things that can be done. I mean, even just, basic ramps to, you shouldn't have to compromise, even the heritage aspect for some basic accessibility right into businesses and things. So it'd be great if there
Yeah.
were some more incentives and rules, to push things in the right direction, because that is many decades that have gone by, like you say, Jeannie. All right. Is there anybody else that has anything they'd like to bring up? Grace, it looked like you had your hand up earlier. I'm not sure if, but then you took it down. So
No, I didn't. Just to add to the point that Jeannie was making, I know I lived in Halifax for some time, and I think any city where you've got like old buildings, Ottawa, Halifax, and even if you can get into the building, the bathroom is always downstairs or upstairs, and I mean, the older we get, the more we need that. And, so that's something that I find, even if I'm walking downstairs to the bathroom myself, I'm always going, how would you expect anybody who was disabled to get down to this bathroom?
Yeah.
And it's a difficult problem.
It is. And even I was, as you were talking, Grace, it popped into my head. I popped into the community outreach center the other day. And so right before it moved to the curling club, I've been asked a lot if I was in collaboration with that. I don't know why that was, but no, I wasn't. But he did reach out to me and said, what do you think? And I said two things. One, it's not an accessible building. So I said, before you would even open, there's a huge spider on the wall. Before you would even open those doors, I would hope that you would have that fixed so that it is fully accessible before the doors even open. And the second thing was, we need a nice outdoor space, because you can't have people sitting in a parking lot on picnic tables, or standing in a parking lot. It's going to lead to trouble. And anyway, here we are. But I went in and I was shocked because somebody had told me that it wasn't accessible. And so when I went in, I said, yeah, right, there's no way that this is not accessible right now. And I walked in and nothing had been done at all, except the fireplace blocked off and walls up over the, just like plywood up over the windows overlooking the rink. And so I asked the people working there, I said, so what do people who have mobility issues, where do they go? What do they do? And she said, oh, we just send them down to Bedford McDonald House. And I said, so how are your clients who live with disabilities, are they still accessing the center? She said, no, and we can't figure out if it's because they don't need it anymore or if they don't know that we can help them. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's not that all of a sudden they don't need the services, and anyway.
Wow.
My secondary question, and I have a second question, Jordan, if that's all right.
Sure. Oh, of course, yes.
In talking about the silos, and this might be a little bit off track, but when you raise the specter of the silos, the more I learn about the way the government, the public service, the civil service works in PEI, the less I like it. And I'm wondering if some of that siloing or disconnectedness between the departments it's because of how the department is set up in the first place, and the things that are in that portfolio that they're not well assigned. Any thoughts on that?
100%. I think that it comes from the top, and so the way that it's structured, and I'm going to add to this, and then I'm going to come back to your point, Grace. Another huge issue that I just see glaringly obvious is what damage politics has done to good policy, and how every 4 years we put in a new government and something gets changed. Oh, to heck with what good policy. This is what we said we were going to do, and we're going to do it. And then things get changed. And so these reactive systems we built are further compounded by this back and forth of governments and just, politics getting in the way of good policy. And to your point about the silos, absolutely. And I think that the way we look at things, if we think about the child protection review happening, it's happening in a silo in social development and housing. These children go to school. These children access health care. This is not something that should be just seen as a social development and housing issue. This is so much bigger than that. And to suggest otherwise is almost shows how little we understand or how little we're applying the knowledge we have. But and that's one of the tricky things, Grace, is because I brought up different things about, not about the civil service, but the way the system in which they work. And words always get twisted, and then I get accused of hating civil servants, right? And so that's another issue, because you're never going to get to the root, the core issue, if you can't talk about the issues that you're hearing about. And I'm so clear to say it's not the people who work in these systems, it's the system in which they work. And there's always going to be people who don't have the best interests, or who are burnt out, and there's all kinds of different things, but definitely we don't support an environment where people can collaborate. People are doing things in silos, and that's not how things are going to change. If we keep looking at things in the exact same way under these little umbrellas and put them in boxes, well, they don't fit in boxes. It's complicated and it's twisted and it's complex, and that's how it should be, because that's how it is, and especially as we consider these big, we always call them wicked problems, and it's almost embarrassing to say that because we've said it so much, but as we consider poverty and food insecurity and all of those different things, we can't look at them as a social development and housing issue, because that's not what they are. But that's what they're being treated as.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, good question there, Grace. One thing I forgot to let you know is that I've got this idea board that I set up, and I just shared the link in the chat, so anybody can access this. And do you need to take care of that spider, Karla? Feel free to if you need to.
Looking for it. It was a big black spider, and I don't love spiders. But anyway, I'm being a big, strong girl.
Okay. All right. Anyway, so this idea board, I've just been taking down notes from ideas or suggestions that people are bringing up, but you're also free to add your own anytime. In fact, I'm going to keep this board going for another few days after this conversation, and I'm going to send it to everybody who had registered and wasn't able to be here today to add anything else that you'd like to, and then I'm going to hand this all over to Karla so that she has a record of all these ideas and the things that we would like her to work on. So with that, is there anybody else that would like to bring anything up that's maybe on your mind right now in the social development, housing, women? Oh, there we go, Grace, go ahead.
I'm from Eastern Kings. I'm actually the mayor of the municipality, and we don't have any social housing in the municipality. We're doing a bit of, or we're going to be doing a bit of a survey to find out if there's an interest in seniors housing up here. But there's that balance between having people stay in the community, but they want closer access to grocery stores and the pharmacy and medical doctors and all this kind of stuff. So there's that whole conundrum. So I don't have a lot to offer. I'm actually more interested in hearing what your ideas are, Karla. So what is kind of like your big, hairy, audacious goal as far as this new critic role, or like what's your priority as far as sticking it to the man?
That's a great question, Grace. So I have so many, it's hard to pick just one. But I guess my biggest, and I appreciate that you said social housing, because I think there's a couple of things that, having through my work and through my education and through life experience, is how much we don't value, like 1 in 5 of our children in PEI are abused. And so they're walking through our hallways at school and, you know, they're not being seen in many cases, and they can go through their whole lives without anyone ever, you know, supporting them. And as a result, they live with, in many cases, live with mental health and addictions issues, and they're not able to care for themselves. And so we have this generation of people who may not have learned, and for various reasons, you know, not just childhood trauma, but their health, and for various reasons have not learned the most basic of skills. Or perhaps there's someone living with addictions, and what they need is, you know, because the gaps and the cracks are so massive, and so we're saying, okay, well, you know, the best thing for you to do is to continue your drug of choice. So how do you budget your money so that you can meet all of your needs and get your drug of choice, right? And so there's like, if we look at the Housing First model through Canadian Mental Health, one of the things that I'd heard about that is that it's a phenomenal program, and I would 100%. And what I've heard from people who've worked with people through the Community Outreach Center is that in many cases, that's not what people need. What people need is actual someone to sit down with them to say, okay, they know how to cook, they know all do that, but they don't know how to make a grocery list. They don't know how to get their groceries or medications, you know. And so it's kind of, that's, we've got all these cookie cutter approaches that just aren't working. And so for me, it's about peeling it back and listening to people. What do you need? What can we do for you? And doing that. And so there's so many social housing examples of social housing models that are so amazing. And they're built in is age in place, right? And so, you know, if you've got like certain needs at one time in the social housing, and so it's people of all ability, people of all walks of life, of ages, who are living under one roof and supporting one another. And sometimes it's direct, you know, that one of the models that I was looking at was where was this one? I can't remember. I can't remember. UK maybe? Where they were, so they'd have, you know, some retired people who love to cook. And so, and then they would have people who were recovering from addictions or active in their addiction. And then they would have, you know, professionals in the building. And so these people who were retired and wanted to would cook for people, and they would check in on people. And so it just kind of built into this community. Of course, it started very intentional, right? They had specific things that they were looking for and people to fill in those roles. So I think that social housing is definitely a priority, because people, it's not enough to put a roof over someone's head. You know, let me rephrase that. It's not enough to just put a roof that is accessible, affordable, and healthy over someone's head. Some people need a lot more than that to survive. And if we consider a basic income guarantee, of course, I would love to see that happen, but you know, while I would say that's a priority, I feel like that's kind of in government's hands now, because we've kind of done the work, they've agreed to do it, and so holding them to account, of course, to make sure that happens. But I think if we, you know, did something like a basic income guarantee and understood what social housing actually meant, and that by that it means that you get your needs met and you are supported until you learn these skills so that you can perhaps move on in the spectrum and be the helper, or you are forever the person who is in need of help, and that's okay, because that's what social housing is. And so I know I didn't answer your question, Grace, but I just have this strong ability, or this strong urge and need for people to live happily and healthily, and the only way we can do that is by listening to them and talking to them. You know, we can't just throw people in a community outreach center and say, there we go, all done, because the fact that, you know, they're hanging out there before, you know, the hours are 8 to 8, they're hanging out there. I keep going back there because that's just such a great example. You know, they're hanging out there at 7:30 in the morning and they're there till 10:30 at night. Well, doesn't that tell us that they need more than what we're offering, you know?
And this is then connected to the public service, whose people who are trying to help folks are overloaded with a whole lot of cases. And so you got somebody in charge of their finance and somebody else in charge of their housing, and somebody else in charge of their upgrading education wise, and somebody else in charge of their health, rather than having one person who could see all of that through.
Mhm.
Yeah. And as my father would say, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing.
Right. Not because they don't want to, because that's the way the system's set up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when, the premier called it cultural change, I was called it before systemic change, but now since the premier uses that language, I try to use that because then I know everybody gets where I'm coming from. But we need a culture change across all departments, but I would argue that social development and housing, we require a huge culture change. We had a meeting with the child and youth table the other day. I'll make this quick. I don't know what our time's like, but so we heard from a few different members of the table, and they were so incredible. And one of them talked about growing up in the foster home, or not foster home, but in group homes in PEI. And we are told, if we go on a website, it tells us that children and youth growing up in group homes get this sort of, this life skill training and this and that. But the reality is that they don't get it,
Yeah.
because at night when they're sleeping, they're prepping meals for the next day, when it says on the website that they're the ones that help prep the meals and learn these skills and stuff like that. And so a lot of times these children, our children, the province's children, are aging out of care and they can't take care of themselves, and they're being forced to be adults and live on their own. And that breaks my heart into a million pieces. And so we need to support them where they are. We need to meet them where they are. They're in our group homes. Okay, well, let's meet them there and let's do these things. I don't understand why we're not. And again, I think it's because of, we have to keep notes on this and notes on that. And the bureaucracy and the red tape is so impenetrable that it's getting in the way of people's health and people's access to services and the barriers that they face. And we can't get out of our own way to help people.
Hmm. Wow, that's
Doom and
a
gloom
really
here. I
sad
don't
state
mean
of
to
affairs.
It is. It really is. But that's what we're here to change.
Yeah.
Pick away, pick away, pick away. Poor Brad Trivers is not going to know what hit him.
Thank you, Karla.
Well, we've got
Thank you, Greg.
we've still got another dozen minutes before 8 o'clock, so there's still time for lots more good conversation about other points. I see that Norm, you put something in the chat there. It was a question about whether people with learning disabilities are often being missed in the system, and I'm just curious if you can elaborate which system you mean. Are you speaking about the social development kind of system, or is it more particular to education? I don't know if you wanted to go off mic or
No, actually, it's both. I think if you're looking at the whole person, they're missed in the educational system, but they often need support outside of the education also.
Yeah.
Yep. And this one, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep being doom and gloom, but I can't help it. So one of the things that, as we know in the education system, people are waiting years and years and years for diagnosis. And up until recently, we fought really hard to change this. And it's finally, they say they're changing it, that you don't need a diagnosis to access the services that you've been deemed to need. So, which is huge, because before people would be waiting years. And so I would have in my grade 1 classroom, this little guy, he comes to my mind every time because it's a specific person. I could see the moment that his self-talk took over, and his self-talk was, "I'm stupid." And he didn't get a diagnosis until he was in grade 6. So he got no services whatsoever. And so if you think of the students that we have who, they were kind of skimmed through, especially our girls with ADD, because they don't have the hyperactivity sometimes. And so our girls are getting through school sometimes and not realizing there's anything wrong until they're adults. And then, they made it through school because they weren't troublemakers and they were quiet. And so they didn't get that attention and that extra support. But absolutely, Norman, because what's happening now, I hear stories all the time. And when I worked at the addiction facility, is people living with ADHD and they don't have a family doctor and they don't have anyone on their case. And so they are trying to experiment with all these different medications, but there's no one to help them with that. There's no one to monitor that. And so they're self-medicating. And so absolutely, people with learning disabilities falling through the cracks. What I'm hopeful for is that that education does move forward with not requiring diagnosis, particularly until they get the backlog of assessments cleared up, the never-ending saga of the assessments being backed up. But I'm hoping that then, you know, you may not require a diagnosis, because sometimes, you know, there's certain things, if you get those supports, that will just kind of get worked out and support you. And so, you know, we label kids so early because we need the label to get the services, but then sometimes we don't label kids. Well, my little neighbor, they suspected since he was 3 that he had autism. He didn't get a diagnosis because they pushed and pushed and pushed. Finally got a diagnosis for him in grade 7, and now they're in family crisis mode. So absolutely, Norman, that's a huge, I think it's a way huger issue than any of us recognize, because they're going through their whole school system with "I'm stupid," and they don't think that, you know, what that does to their self-worth, and they just get, yeah, I think it's a huge issue.
Becomes a self-fulfilling label, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's thanks, Norm. And I see Michael McLean here has put a really good kind of question / idea into the chat. What would it take to modify the silo approach of the public service on PEI to one that takes a case manager type approach across various government departments to deliver services to the public in cases of vulnerable populations? That's a really good question. And I know that Michael, just from what I know about your background, you would have dealt with vulnerable populations from a few different angles. So so I can see this is coming from a place of insight. Yeah, what do you have? Is that something that you're familiar with, that type of approach, Karla? Is that maybe what you're thinking about when you think about silos breaking down, or?
It's interesting when I talk to people who have worked in different sectors. So like Michelle Beaton, for example, she always talks about project management. So she kind of looks at things from that angle. And so it's interesting to me the way people's different life experiences make them kind of think about things. So I so appreciate when case manager, I wouldn't have ever thought to put it that way. But I think that just as I read the way, I'm going to go back up, as I read the way that you describe that, I think that that's exactly what would be really helpful. And I don't even think that it would have to necessarily be in every case, because there are some cases that are pretty cut and dry. But then there's some that aren't. And so, you know, as we consider people living with disabilities, so having to prove every year over and over again that indeed, no, their arm has not grown back, you know, and so they have to just keep proving that they're still living with a disability. Whereas if you had someone who is case managing for you, you know, you wouldn't have to rehash those things all of the time. And how, I mean, how, I'm going to devaluing, disrespectful, I don't know the word, but can you imagine having to fight like that all of the time and just be in survival mode? So absolutely some sort of case. Now, what I'm trying to do with that, Michael, is try to figure out, because I think that that's a really important approach. And I think that that allows for a more holistic approach that takes into account all of the social determinants of health, so that you don't, when you look at a person, you're not looking at them at their finances. And when I'm looking at you through your my finance lens, I'm going to look at you through my mental health lens. I'm going to look at you like, it's just, it doesn't take into account that people are human and they're complex and there's more than one side of them. So I absolutely, so what for me, Michael, is to figure out what tool that I use in my toolbox to get that out, you know, like there's motions and legislation and questions and stuff like that. So I think that thank you for bringing that up, because that's such a profound, simple change that I think that we could work towards. I'm just not sure exactly how to do that, but I've made a note of it for as something to think about. And if there's any thoughts that any of you have on any of this, and Michael, for the case manager approach, if you add it into the ideas board, because I really, one of the values that makes me feel good in the Green Party is the grassroots approach. And so I one of the biggest things that I take pride in my work, and it's difficult, it can be challenging, so I know I'm not perfect at it, but what I strive to be is to meet with organizations and to meet with individuals who both reach out to me and or, you know, if I'm noticing work they're doing or advocacy things or whatever, is that I talk to them, because I don't pretend to have all of the answers. And even when I think I do, I know I don't. And so it's in these conversations that helps guide my work. And that's what I did for education, and this will be absolutely no difference, especially as I'm learning. This is really valuable.
Yeah, and Michael and anybody else, what can really be valuable is if you're aware of any kinds of approaches like this happening in any other jurisdiction, like, you know, let Karla know about that, because sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes there's been a lot of thinking done, and there's models that show you know, that these have been successful. And I'm sure there's got to be somewhere in the world that's doing something a little bit more like what Michael's proposing. I mean, it makes so much sense. It's almost like the reason that people want family doctors, right? Somebody to tie together, you know, that whole view of the person and their health, whereas what we're relying on is just a bunch of emergency rooms for various different emergencies that people might face in their lives with no connection to one another.
Yeah.
That's,
And prime example, there's two things, and I wanted to say thank you for bringing that, because one of the things that I've learned is that if you are trying to bring forward a new idea or a new to PEI idea, if there's other jurisdictions doing it, it makes it way easier for government to get on board. So if we're talking about things, or if you ever hear me or hear someone talking about things, send me an email like, oh, hey, Karla, they're doing that in this jurisdiction. And the other part to that is, so my whole slip disc thing, not poor Karla, but it's just such a good example. So slip disc, thought I was having a foot issue. My doctor recommended I go see the podiatrist. I needed orthotics. Okay, I bought orthotics. I started seeing a physiotherapist and a acupuncturist, and things were starting to get better. And my acupuncturist said, "Oh, wow." He said, "Did we talk about your childhood tailbone injury?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, tell me about it, because I know you had one." So I did. And he said, "Your tailbone's out of alignment." So he fixed it. And then I said, he said, "You're going to have trouble walking for the next little bit. It's going to be weird to walk." And it's still weird to walk 3 weeks later. And so I'm thinking, I probably shouldn't wear my orthotics now, because what if it pops my tailbone back into place? So sure enough, when I went back to see him yesterday, I said, "I never thought to ask you this before." And he said, "Oh," he said, "please don't wear those while we're doing this work." He's like, "Actually," he said, "once your tailbone's back in place, you probably won't need those anymore." Like, what, you know, if there was someone who was, you know, on kind of knew everything, that's just an example in health, but if you had someone that kind of looked at the person holistically, to be like, "Oh no, you don't need orthotics, your tailbone's out of place, you know, oh no, you don't need social assistance, you need to," you know, or whatever that looks like, for people to support them how they really need it. Some people don't need money thrown at them, they need something else, you know. And
oh, yeah. That makes
yeah.
so much sense. I mean, we see how many people, you know, start off with chronic pain issues, which might be from something like that, and then they get into problems with opioids, and then, you know, one thing leads to another, and then they're homeless, and so it's all connected.
Oh, I used to say when I worked at the addiction facility, I used to say we're all just one situation away from being in the exact same boat.
Oh gosh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And another thing too, Grace, as we're talking about priorities, and it's, you know, I would at one time only considered this as health. When I worked at the addiction facility and just realized the barriers, you know, if they wanted to get teeth work done, dental work done, the fighting they had to do for that. They couldn't find housing, but, you know, we'd put them in a taxi at the end when they finished their time at the transition unit and wave to them as we knew they were going back to hang out on the street, because they had nowhere else to go. And
Hmm.
so, and we knew that, we all knew that, government knew that, everybody knew that, you know, but it still continues to happen all the time. And so that's why I think, you know, as we consider the fact in our community right now, in District 12, where we've got, and that's another reason that I do believe that this portfolio was given to me, just because the amount of work I'm doing in social development and housing for my constituents anyway, it's probably a very good fit. And so when we look at like Smith Lodge and the Community Outreach Center and Bedford McDonald and all these places that support, if you're going to do community-based care like that, which is the direction we need to head in, absolutely. We can't just throw these things into a community and expect it to work. We need to listen to what people need, and we need to provide those services so that it makes it a safe place in our community and a healthy place in our community, for people, for all people to live, work, grow, and have fun in.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're at 8 o'clock, but if it's all right with you, I see that Jeannie had her hand up, so we could maybe take one more. And I saw that, Jeannie, you mentioned Finland having made some really great strides in both education and ending homelessness, so they're a good model to look at. Is that, I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to elaborate on, or if you had something else, but feel free
No,
to go
it's
ahead.
something else.
Yeah.
As far as financing different programs, I find that the governments tend to, they give grants to everybody, no matter what their economic situation is. Not all the time, but what's, for instance, well, the gas tax. So the way they've got it there, you could be really wealthy, but you get this tax lessened for you. So if they could only save money by not giving to the wealthy, those who don't need it, and help those who do, there would be more money along. And it's programs like roads. It's always, there's so much road building going on because they get money from the feds. So I think there needs to be more pressure on the federal government to help in areas like health and housing, and we don't need roads built and more roads built and the land paved over. So it's, yeah, sorry, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jeannie, and it's tough because, you know, there's all kinds of different things that I've read and different people that I've spoken to, and many within the Green Party who would like to see Charlottetown not be so focused on cars. And what could that look like, you know, and how would that change the downtown? And there's all kinds of just such interesting discussions. And Jeannie, whenever you talk about, you know, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, there's so many examples of where that happens. And it's just a matter of finding those. And it's so funny because those are really conversations. You want to shut down a conversation, you know, in certain groups, bring up taxes, right? And people, you know, they don't want to say anything. But it is, I think that I don't even know the half of where we would begin with that. But I bet you, Jeannie, there's tons of examples of ways that we could different places where we could look at that, you know. I don't even know where they are. But when you say Finland about the housing thing, I believe I read something about Finland as well. And I know that they've done a couple of things, but one of the things that they do follow is that housing first model, which is very effective. Just not in, you know, as you look at more complex cases, we just need to be flexible in how we deliver a program like that. But, you know, and actually I just finished reading, I read it a little while ago. It's a new report out of Nova Scotia, and I can't remember the title of it, and I don't know if I have it here with me or not. But it's about housing as a human right. And so some really strong recommendations that have come out of that, and where we need to look at discrimination in housing, and how we need to look at social housing. And one of the things that they mentioned was this housing first model, and how we need to get to a point in society where we've taken care of people, so then we can look at who is still struggling, and these are the people that need those extra supports and that extra layer of things that not everybody needs. But we're still in that cookie cutter. When you apply a cookie cutter approach like we have now, nobody gets what they need. You know,
Yeah.
it's like that picture of standing at the fence, right? And do you know what I mean by that? And there's one where everybody's standing, everybody gets a block. And then so some are like way over the fence and some still can't see over the fence. And then
Yeah.
there's the other one where people get different size blocks. And Marcia Carroll took it a step further yesterday and she said, no, do you know what we need to do? She said, we need to make that fence glass. And I said, yeah, you're right.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
If I could just make a point on the roads thing. And you had mentioned when you said about, taking the cars out of the downtown. To most rural people, we can avoid the downtown in Charlottetown. Because we can do either shopping locally or we can go out to, the malls that are outside of town. But roads are a big issue in rural PEI. And I think it goes back to the days of, when I remember when somebody made a joke one time about in the St. Peter's constituency, and God bless the man, I can't remember his name now, but somebody was making a joke that in his constituency, it shaled and it shaled and it shaled. And the idea was, of course, back then you called up your MLA and you needed a bunch of shale in your lane or whatever in the road, and you called it and you got it. So, I mean, in a lot of the rural PEI roads, the patches have patches have patches. You can follow the patching crew down the road, and they're going to come down for now, but they're going to be back again. And one of the things that's not transparent in PEI, and I know this is not your bailiwick, Karla, but is how does road A get priority over road B, C, D, or E? There doesn't seem to be, in this instance, a cookie cutter approach, which may work better for roads than it works for people. But if we had a qualitative assessment that you applied to roads and said, okay, these are the real crap ones and these are the ones we need to focus on first. Well, then there's some that are better and some that are better and some that are better. The better ones, of course, go to the bottom of the pack, so anyway, I just wanted to put that little caveat in there,
Yeah.
because, you need to be a critic, not just for urban PEI, but for rural PEI too.
This
All right,
this
thanks.
is, yeah.
Grace, whenever the idea that, the federal funding and Jeannie, this is kind of how I took your point, because absolutely the roads, I don't live in a road district, so I don't get the road code, but I know so many do, and it is an issue. And so the federal funding, I guess the point that I took from Jeannie is that it seems as though there's all kinds of federal funding for pavement, the 20-cent dollars or the 40-cent dollars, but for housing, there's very little. And when there was the Rapid Housing Initiative or something like that, our government doesn't apply for them. And so A, how do you motivate the federal government to not just fund pavement at a provincial level, but to fund housing and social housing? Because at one time, that's where we got a lot of our co-ops and social housing. There was a big boom and a push from the federal government, but then they backed right off and provincial governments didn't keep up with it. And so I think there's absolutely some pressure to be put on federal government to help, not just with pavement, but with housing as well, Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, Grace.
I was just going to say, I remember learning, I forget who I was in conversation with. It was somebody who was very knowledgeable in that area. And they said that when it comes to housing, we lack kind of the local expertise here on PEI to take advantage of a lot of these programs, funding programs from the federal government that exist to get that money for housing and do the projects. Whereas we have, when it comes to transportation, we have this whole department who just, has so much experience and they're just a machine to get roads built and to get the funding to do it. So maybe what we need is just better expertise working on getting that funding and applying it in rounds of like housing and other areas. We're
Somebody's job.
great.
Sorry,
Sorry, you're lagging a little bit there. It's almost like your internet quality just took a dip for a second there.
No doubt. Somebody else probably got on the internet.
Oh, somebody's watching a big movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're at 8:10, so we'll wrap it up here. but I'm just gonna remind everybody that I'm gonna send you the idea board link as well as the recording tomorrow. And I would really encourage you to add anything else that comes across your mind, you know, to do with social development, housing, which we actually haven't really talked about a lot, but I know there's a lot coming up with regards to housing with the new Residential Tenancy Act, just to name one. And we didn't even get into status of women issues at all. And I know there's a few women here on the call. So anyway, if there's anything else that comes into your mind, I know that we don't have a lot of time to cover such a broad range of topics in these conversations, but anything that you add to those boards will be passed on to Karla, and it'll be very valuable. So I'll give it until the weekend before I give Karla the final board. So you've got a few days if anything comes up for you. And as before we leave too, I'll just make a plug for the next couple of sessions like this that we'll be having. The next one will be on Thursday this week, 7 o'clock as well, with Michelle Beaton, and she is the new critic for health and wellness. So she's got that one of those big wicked files that accounts for about half of our provincial budget and is filled with, yeah, that needs a lot of systemic change. So anything that you can do to help her in that, I'm sure she'll appreciate. And then next week, on Thursday next week, the 15th of July, we're going to be talking to Trish Altas. She's the new critic for economic growth, tourism, and culture. And those might kind of seem like, you know, a bunch of leftovers, but they're all really linked. And especially now with COVID having struck tourism and culture disproportionately, and them being really huge parts and important parts of our economy, not to mention, you know, our, you know, cultural life on PEI. That will be a very interesting discussion as well. So please do attend those. I'll actually put the link right now to our events page so you can where you can get the registration information for everything. And Karla's put her email in the and phone number there, so so definitely get in touch with her anytime. That's one of the great things about our MLAs is they're very accessible. They're always willing to talk with people about ways to make PEI better. So thank you once again, and I'll wish you all a very good evening, rest of your evening. And thank you,
Thank you,
Karla,
everybody.
for this conversation tonight.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Reach out anytime, please.
Yay, thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.